Hi there, Kathy here. Smooth and Panicle Hydrangea are well loved for their beautiful oblong white or pink blooms. They're hardy, they're reliable, they bloom throughout the summer and into the fall. So what's not to like? If you want to create more blooms on these hydrangea though, there's some key things. First of all, you have to site them properly. They do like to have sun. And a good dose of annual fertilizer is a good idea. However, the real key lies in how you treat them in the spring. It comes right down to spring pruning. These hydrangea bloom on new growth, and you can see that because the blooms are all on the tips, on the outside of the hydrangea as opposed to deep inside. So the growing tips are where the blooms come from. So how do you create more blooms? You do it by creating more growing tips, and that again comes down to pruning. So come with me, I'll show you what I do with mine in the spring, and I'll show you some pictures of what they end up looking like in the summer. This Invincible Spirit hydrangea is a smooth hydrangea or hydrangea arborescens. I haven't pruned it yet, and it is leafed out more than I like to see them leafed out before I prune them. Can't help it, we had several days in the 70s, followed by a couple of bouts of rain, and it just opened right up. But I am going to come in here today and I'm going to prune it. I'm going to cut it back by about a third, and you can see where I cut it last year. If you notice, there is a single stem. It was clipped, and now, let's get that one. Single stem, it was clipped, and now there are two stems coming out. These bloom on new growth. So the more stems you can create, the more flowers you're going to get. So in this case, I came in, I cut the single stem, it put out two new stems, and I got double the flowers. That's kind of the idea with all of these. In fact, here we go. Here's another example. You can see there was a large stem in here. In fact, there's two right next to each other. A large stem, I trimmed it, I cut it, and it created two. So I'm going to try to, as I said, cut this back by a good third so that it puts out lots of fresh new growth, and that growth is where the blooms are going to come from. I've begun to prune this Invincible Spirit hydrangea. This is a hydrangea arborescens or smooth hydrangea. And before I go too far, I want to show you how much I'm taking off. And I think you can probably see that I've taken quite a bit off, not just the old flowers, taking out any dead wood, and I'm clipping back to some nice buds. And here's an example here. So I took off the top 2 feet or so, and I've left some nice buds behind. This plant gets very, very large. And in order to maximize the flower power of this plant, pruning actually creates a situation where for every branch you cut, every single branch, it puts out a couple of more. That way you're getting more flowers, because this is a plant that blooms on new wood. So all of this old stuff down here below is not going to be producing a whole lot of flowers for you unless it's been trimmed, and I do trim along the edges. Most of the flowers, as you see, are going to be on the tips, and you can see this just by observing the old flowers from last year. So here we go. My little friend is all pruned, and you can see I've got a nice Big batch of prunings here. That includes dead branches, flowers, the top couple of feet of branches where I want to have it start forming new branches and buds. But it's looking pretty good. I shaped it up as I went along. The last step now, well, one of the last steps, I guess. I see that there are still some leaves stuck in the bottom here. As I mentioned in my last hydrangea pruning video, I like to get rid of all the leaves down there so little critters don't decide to nest in there. And I'll give it a nice dose of all-purpose fertilizer to help hasten its recovery and formation of new branches and buds. By the way, this is a hydrangea that is not pH sensitive as far as flower color goes. It's a lovely pink color, and I'm looking forward to seeing it again this season. The next hydrangea that I'm going to address is this incredible that's behind me. It's another hydrangea arborescens, smooth hydrangea, and it is huge. But I'm going to try to do the exact same thing with this that I did with the Invincible Spirit. I'm going to try to get a third of it off, third of it down, reduce its height, reduce its width, and create an environment where it can start putting out new branches and new flower buds for me. I'll get you a good before shot here. This thing has got to be 10 feet across. It's probably, well, a good 5.5 feet tall at this point. And as you can see, it's a hydrangea that blooms on new growth. All the flowers are at the tips. And that's why we're going to concentrate on pruning it to create more tips for more flowers. Now I'm pruning this incredible later than I usually like to do it, but I've discovered an unexpected benefit of getting out here a month later than I would have liked to have done it. I would have liked to have done this in late March, and here we are in late April. But what I'm seeing now that I'm here that much later is that the leaf rollers are out and active. And usually I have to come out here and I have to pick off all of the leaves that have leaf roller activity. And you can see how this leaf has been sort of sewn shut. There is a little caterpillar in there, busily nesting. By pruning this much later, I'm noticing I'm cutting off a whole lot of leaf rollers. So that's a good thing. If you don't know what a leaf roller is, they are something that does seem to really like these smooth hydrangea. I'll put a link to that video for you. Here we go. Here's my big pile of debris. And here is my nice, incredible, nice and pruned up. You can see that it's been shaped up, and I've taken all of the dead that I could get to off of there, as well as the dead flowers, and made it a very nice shape for it to start again this year. And like I said, you know, you end up with an awful lot of debris when you're done. And I think that I was not quite as aggressive about this. I was more conservative than I usually am. Now, one thing that you will notice is that there are some stakes in the ground around this hydrangea. They're metal stakes. I put them in there permanently because this thing puts out so many flowers and gets so heavy that if you get a good rainstorm in the middle of the summer, it'll pull the plant right to the ground. So in order to avoid that, I do go ahead and I tie it up a bit first thing in the season. And the leaves and the branches grow out and you don't even see those stakes as the season goes on. So another hydrangea ready to go. Here is another smooth hydrangea that I'm going to be cutting back. This is another Invincible Spirit. This one is a much smaller plant. We had moved a plant, and a couple of chunks had broken off of it, and we replanted them, and so we've ended up with a couple of nice additional plants. But as you can see, there's a lot of dead flowers at the top. You can see that there are dead branches on the sides. So we're going to be removing all of that, and then I'll show you what the after picture looks like. 10 minutes later, and you can see that this Invincible Smooth Hydrangea, and I think this one is an Invincible Ruby as I recall, is looking a lot different. It's looking nice and neat. Lots of material has been removed. In fact, you can see I actually removed an awful lot from it. And it may look like a lot, and it may look like I took this plant down quite a bit, but you'll be amazed. This plant's going to be bigger than it was originally by the end of the season. So here is a panicle hydrangea. This one is a bobo, which is one that tends to stay a little smaller, although this is pretty much 5 feet high at this point. And the buds on this one, the leaf buds, are not as pronounced yet the way they were on the Invincible Spirit on the arborescence. So this is more like when I like to come out here and get them pruned. It's the same idea though. You can see where I made cuts last year, and everywhere that there was a single stem and I cut it back, now we have two. And by having those additional stems, we will have additional flowers, because this hydrangea blooms on new growth. And one of the clues that you can see is that all the flowers are on the tips as opposed to being on the inside of the branches. And there's a clue that it was blooming on new growth. Now this big guy is another panicle hydrangea. This one is Little Quickfire. Same thing with the bobo. It's at a good stage at this point to be cutting it back, because I can see where all of the buds are. And when I cut, I'm going to be cutting above a nice bud. Now you can see from last year where I trimmed this, and you can see wherever there was a single stem that I trimmed, it put out two. And those two new stems are where the flowers came from. Now this bobo is another shrub that I want to take down by about 1/3. And it's got some long, sort of thicker branches here. And it's not always obvious where the buds are, so you kind of have to look. But if you notice, I've looked for the very tiny buds coming out and have cut above them. So I know that this is a live branch and that it has the capacity to put out a couple of other branches from that point where I cut it. Besides removing dead branches, I will also come in and I will remove anything that just looks a little too spindly and weak. This kind of pruning of the shrubby types of hydrangea, the panicle hydrangea, the smooth hydrangea, it's really, really critical if you want to increase the number of flowers that you're getting and to keep the shrub looking healthy and full and full of vigor. So don't be afraid to go in and trim. You'll be surprised at the results. Now here is my panicle hydrangea, my bobo, after trimming. And you can see I cut quite a bit of material off of it. And it now has a much more even height and width all the way around. Wasn't too much dead in there. I probably could have taken out a little more just to thin it out. But one thing that you want to notice if you're trying to identify what kind of hydrangea you have, the big leaf or mountain hydrangeas have very straight canes coming up from the bottom and are not multi-branching or have very few branches on them compared to this, whereas a panicle hydrangea is a multi-branch shrub and it can actually get fairly dense as it becomes mature. So besides looking at leaves and flowers, The branching structure is another way to identify them or to differentiate between them. Now it's time to address this little quickfire panicle hydrangea. This is probably at least 7 feet tall. And you can actually see what happened where I pruned it in the past. Because here you can see where the branch was clipped and the plant put out multiple branches in its place. There's some more right there. So again, because it blooms on new growth, the more new growth you can encourage, the more branching, the more blooms you're going to get. Another hydrangea down. See all of my clippings, and here is the little quickfire. On this one, I took out anything that I saw that was dead. I also took about 2 feet off of the top all the way around, just to create some new junctions for new growth. But it's all cleaned up now and ready to bloom. Maybe not ready to bloom quite yet, but at least ready to form its new buds. I hope you enjoyed this hydrangea pruning video, and if you want to see more content like this, by all means please hit the like button, and if you would consider subscribing, I would really appreciate it. Until next time, have a wonderful day in the garden.